Hello, thank you for listening to our webinar. This session is going to focus on Unit 3 of the Level 1 and Level 2 Technical Awards in Music Technology, and I do hope you find the session useful. So for those of you who don't already know us, my name is Karen Taylor. I work in the curriculum team here at NCFE, and joining me today is Lead EQA for Music Technology, Graham Lees.
Hello there.
So on the screen you can see our agenda for the session today. To start with, Graham's going to give you an overview of the unit. Then he's going to talk through each learning outcome in turn, and we have a recording to play you for LO2 and then a mix to play for LO3. Right, so we do have quite a bit to get through, so I'm going to hand you over to Graham and we'll make a start.
Super, thank you very much, Karen. Quick overview of the unit and where this sits in relation to the rest of the units in the Level 1, Level 2 Technical Award qualifications. So this unit allows learners to understand terms and develop skills in a sound recording environment. The unit can be run as a standalone or in combination with, for example, Unit 1 of the qualification. You may also consider approaches in which learners record material for Unit 2 as compositional work, or for Unit 4 by, for example, creating Foley. The learners will understand the process of planning a recording session, making a multi-track recording, mixing down the recording and evaluating that process and outcome. In delivery, learners should be aware of how to plan and record a session and be familiar with recording equipment. It will be useful for learners to work in small groups to make practice recordings as part of teaching for the unit prior to the assessment taking place. Learners could work on mixing skills during teaching and learning with material they have recorded or through use of existing material, for example commercially available stems or recordings made previously within your centre. For assessment, however, the mix must be the work that the learner has recorded. Assessment for the unit is based on the know, do, review model, with LO1 being planning, a know, LO2 being recording, being a do, LO3 being mixing, do, and LO4 being evaluation and review. So this unit differs to the other 3 units in the qualification by having 4 learning outcomes rather than 3, an additional do learning outcome for the mix. Each learning outcome is graded across pass merit distinction, with grading descriptors and exemplification in the Level 1 and Level 2 specifications to allow you as assessors to make a grading decision. In this session, we're going to look at an example of a Level 2 portfolio with reference to those descriptors. The Level 1 and Level 2 content can be taught side by side, and the class can then be differentiated by assessment. There are some small areas of content which appear in the Level 2 specification but not in Level 1, which also help to differentiate between the levels. In this example, 3 briefs have been used, with the 3rd brief assessing 2 learning outcomes. It's worth noting that a maximum of 4 briefs could be used, 1 for each learning outcome. The given briefs are NCFE exemplars, but you could modify these to engage your learners based on their needs. It's suggested that you refer to the NCFE Internal Assessment Writing and Delivery Guidance document, which can be found on the NCFE website, to look at how to build assignment briefs to best serve your learners. Okay, so I'd now like to look at learning outcome 1. Super. I'll give you an overview of the learning outcome, and then we'll have a look at the examples of work that are available. If you would like to open the exemplar brief documents in the pack, we shall start by looking at examples of assignments that could be set. So this is an assignment brief for learning outcome 1 for the unit. In this learning outcome, we're asking the learners to demonstrate the ability to plan a recording session with reference to equipment choices and timeline. Assessment of this learning outcome should follow delivery, in which learners are made aware of the operation of a recording environment and how this relates to planning a successful recording session. It is suggested that once learners are comfortable in the recording environment, they should be tasked with planning and running sessions to gain experience before undertaking this assessment. The exemplar brief asks learners to plan a session based on the context of recording a demo for a local 4-piece band. It's important to note that this aligns to the minimum requirement of 4 tracks to be recorded, although in reality multiple tracks would likely be used for each instrument, resulting in a higher track count. The ensemble will also allow for at least one overdub, for example backing vocals or additional guitars, which again is required by the assessment. The material to be recorded should be between 2 and 5 minutes long to allow learners to explore recording and mixing, but this may change with context. In the example of learner work we'll be looking at, the ensemble consists of vocals, bass, guitar and keyboards, so it's likely that the scenario would be amended to accommodate the specific nature of the ensemble. It's important to note that the musical outcome is not assessed in this unit, although as ever a more experienced ensemble is likely to be easier to record effectively. Performers can be the learner themselves, classmates, school ensembles, teachers or even external performers. You will notice that the brief as an exemplar does not feature handout or deadline dates. It will be best practice to add these to the briefs given out to learners in line with the time suggested by guided learning hours within the specification. The types of evidence in this example are shown as a written report, but the context of the assignment and evidence type can be changed to meet the needs and interests of your learners, although in this instance a written document to be referenced during the session would seem to be the most logical form in context. Super. So note that the brief asks for areas of content as given in the specification, and these areas must be covered in the learner's response, so it's important that they're clearly stated. The areas of content are on the screen in front of you, so health and safety, microphones, audio interfaces, multi-track recorders, monitoring, planning a session. So advise and delivery that you should read through the glossary within the unit and the published delivery guide to consider content requirements within each area. I'd like to look at the learner work for this learning outcome now, so it might be useful if you open the LO1 document.
Right, that's it there.
Okay, great. So this is the learner work for learning outcome 1. You can see that the learners produced a well-organised plan which takes in all of the content, and I'd encourage you to look at that at your leisure.
So for anybody watching this, if you would like a copy of these resources, we want to put our email address on at the end, so you can just drop us an email and I'll be able to send these over to you. Obviously, I don't expect you to be able to read through them all as we're going.
Super. So I've got a little bit of commentary about the work. Right. So if we move on to the next slide, we can see a super. So overall, the level 2 learner work for LO1 has been graded as a merit. The learner has produced a plan in written format in response to the brief, which is an effective form of evidence. The evidence is presented generally neatly and concisely by use of headings to match the unit content. As required by grading, all areas of content are covered, including health and safety, microphones and DI, audio interfaces, multi-track recorder, monitoring and timeline planning. The plan would allow the session to be undertaken and some explanation of choices in equipment are shown. The evidence could have been strengthened by greater technical detail in all areas, for example, in setting up monitoring for the musicians and engineers, and potentially more attention to timescales. The time given is plausible but quite limited. The photographs give some detail of equipment and mic positions for the guitar. These could have been more functionally useful and perhaps annotated to show the learner's intentions. Note that roles in the small group are identified. In this unit for Learning Outcome 2, it's fine for learners to work in small groups, but all learners must undertake the required practical activities. Super. So I'd now like to look at how we can assess learning outcome 2. In learning outcome 2, we ask the learners to undertake the recording session that they've planned in learning outcome 1. For this reason, these learning outcomes should be undertaken in sequence. In this example brief, we can see that the scenario carries through and the requirements for the session are clearly stated. The learners are assessed on their ability to capture a minimum of 4 tracks, including at least 1 overdub by using recording equipment. To evidence this learning outcome, learners must produce evidence that they have undertaken the session. This should include process evidence produced during the session and a rough stereo bounce of the recording. It's important to note that the learner must produce evidence of process as well as the final piece of music. As elsewhere, the types of evidence are very open to allow for self-determination and could include video or screencast evidence with commentary or a written report. The learners must also present the final piece as a stereo audio file rather than a DAW project. It's suggested that video evidence would be an appropriate way to present evidence for this LO in terms of process evidence, which could be potentially backed up by teacher observation documents. Super. So I'd like to take a moment and look at the Level 2 learner work in response to this learning outcome. There's also audio attached to this, which can be obtained as well. So would make sense to listen to the audio in line with the document when you come to listen to it.
Shall we go through the work first and then put the audio on?
Yeah, super. Yeah.
So again, I'm going to scroll through this, but if you would like your own copy, just drop me an email and I'll send this over. And I think that's it for that.
It is, yes.
Right, so I'll put the recording on.
Super.
There we go.
Lovely. So in terms of the evidence, process evidence and the audio evidence there, the learners produce a stereo mix of the resultant session recording, along with written evidence in the log including photos. The recording is well made, with details audible in each track and no distortion. More than 4 tracks are present and overdubbing has taken place. It's worth noting that any musical errors made by the performers do not affect the assessment. The choice of song is somewhat shorter than the recommended 2 minutes, but as 7 tracks have been used, this should allow the learner to demonstrate appropriate mixed skills in learning outcome 3. The process evidence shows thought being given to the recording consistently across all skills, although it does tend to repeat some points from learning outcome 1 in terms of planning. The learner's work is backed up by an appropriately written teacher observation document. It would be desirable to make use of video evidence to support observations where possible, but a correctly written observation allows for evidence of the learner engaging with each required element in the session. The learner's written evidence is logically presented, but could have included more technical detail in some areas and may have benefited from annotation of photographs. Lovely. So I'd just like to look at learning outcomes 3 and 4 now. The example brief used here covers learning outcomes 3 and learning outcome 4. The brief continues with the same context as used for learning outcome 1 and learning outcome 2. Again, it's important to note here that the mix used for this assessment must be of the recording created by the learner in LO2 and planned in LO1, so the LOs are sequential. The brief states that areas of mixing, the areas of mixing that must be considered, namely editing, EQ, effects, dynamics processing, balance, stereo field, monitoring and automation. The mix should be undertaken by learners working individually rather than as a group exercise. In LO4, the learners are asked to show what changes were made between the rough recording and the final mix and assess strengths and areas for improvement. Evidence of the final mix of the stereo file in an appropriate format, as well as evidence of process are required. For LO4, evidence of the review is required. Lovely. So I'd like to take a moment to look at the learner work in response to these LOs. We've got supplied audio and we've got some documents.
What should we do first? Should we open the documents first or listen to the recording?
Yeah, if we open the documents and I can give a commentary over the documents.
Right. There we go.
Lovely. So we've got here the LO3 element of the document. So the process commentary is generally logical and references all areas: editing, EQ, effects, dynamics processing, balance, stereo field, monitoring and automation. Thought is given in most areas, but some lack detail. For example, balance and automation are quite brief. The mixdown, which I'll listen to in a minute, itself is presented as a stereo WAV file. The mixdown is competent and shows an improvement on the rough track. However, there are some areas in which balance is a little bit inconsistent. The bass has likely suffered from mixing on headphones, as the tone is rather indistinct when played back on speakers. There is some creative use of effects and processing, however. In the review, the learner has considered improvements which could be made to the mix, but has not always followed through to give specific ways in which they could be undertaken. The review is, however, well laid out and generally quite detailed. So that brings us to the end of looking at the written work. When we've scrolled through it, you can see the level of detail there and the use of screenshots in the learner's work. Here we are approaching the LO4 section of the learner's work. They've written it summatively following the mix. You can see they've broken it down logically into a review of how they treated each instrument.
I think that's the end there.
It is.
So, shall I put the recording on?
Yes, if we have listened to the mixed version, that'd be great.
Protect
Super. So that brings us to the end of looking through the learner's work. I hope it's been informative. Just to recap there in terms of the learning outcomes, the learners achieved a merit in learning outcome 1, a distinction in learning outcome 2, and merits in learning outcomes 3 and 4, meaning that an overall merit would be awarded for the unit.
Right, so on the screen there you can see our contact details. If you would like a copy of the resources that we've used during the webinar, if you'd like to just drop us an email using that top email address there, curriculum@NCFE, and I can send those over to you, that's no problem. So thank you for listening in this afternoon, and thanks to Graham for putting those resources together for us.
Thank you very much.
Okay everyone, thanks, bye.